Okay, if you can, good evening. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. I'm waiting for Father Juan. Hopefully at home, you can hear me at home. Thanks again for our second session of our Belle City Catholic Summer Speaker Series. Our second series, Father Juan will introduce you, but it was kind of an idea that I had from a class that I was taking that really intrigued me. And I don't know if I passed that class or not. It was my instructor, but we'll have to figure that out, but whether or not it worked. So hopefully at home, once again, if you are joining us online, as we continue this the series tonight, if you have questions on anything that the speaker says, we invite you to type in the question. We will again take those questions first, and then we will then go offline and then have an in-house conversation. So again, like Father Juan said, if you want to join us in those in-house conversations, you need to come. So, but we will take your questions first. So once again, our pastor administrator of the Catholic Community Central Racine, who's the backbone of Belle City Catholic, Father Juan.
Rob, you know why we chose you? Because he's struggling in the class, so he needs to pass. So we brought all these people to be here for you, so that you be kind in the grade with Eloy. So Rob is from the Archdiocese. He works in the office that is a very long name, Director of Dignity of Human Person and Coordinator of Social Justice Ministry. So yeah, it's a full mouth. So anyway, welcome all of you to this second series of we would like to have the same beautiful and candid conversation that we had last week. I think we are fulfilling the idea of this event, that is to create a space in which we could discuss our faith honestly and openly and be able to enrich ourselves with what we hear and from the speakers and also from all of us around here. So welcome and thank you for being part of this. I'm very excited to see that you all came back and some other people came back again, so that's a good thing. And anyway, so Rob, the topic that we chose again is Eloy. I have to call that. No, don't know. Eloy is in the process of studying to be a deacon. So he has to go to classes, and so he has been out of school for a while, so he need to get into the rhythm and studying and learning and reading books and all that, and writing papers and all those things that a student does. And so as the priest of the parish which he's from, so I have to sit down with him and be the supervisor, but then he also asks for tutoring or mentoring on the different classes that he has. So we were discussing and talking about social justice class, and in the light of last year's elections and all those things that happened, we thought that there was a lot of division regarding social issue topics. We even did a series of talks in our morning Bible studies about the social teachings of the church. But we were always coming back to this point, and so we decided that this was going to be a part of our summer series of talks. And so who better to do the talk than Rob, who does the office of the Archdiocese. And again, we wanted to be an event that is not church, even though we are priests and you work at the Archdiocese. But we wanted in a different setting. We didn't want it to be in a church because, I mean, you probably all will come, but we wanted to be an open mind discussion and conversation. And so that's why you came up with the name of the topic, social justice, how to take a non-political stand, right? Is that how it goes? Anyway, so Rob, welcome. Let us welcome Rob to our presentation.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I actually know Don Miller, and I know that many of you know him too. I mean, Don actually worked in the office that is mine now several years ago. And I was just telling him, this is my first presentation in front of a public audience since February of 2020. And so it is it's great to be here in front of you here. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. As Father said, I work at the Archdiocese. I'm the director of the Office for the Dignity of the Human Person. And my job includes a lot of things. It involves formation in Catholic social teaching, and that's part of the reason that I'm teaching Eloy and his fellow deacon aspirants in their first year of the deacon class. But I also am involved in working with national organizations and our Respect Life work and advocating for social justice in the community. And I'm also the director for Catholic Relief Services, which is the U.S. Catholic Community's National Relief Agency. And I also am the diocesan director for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And some of you may be involved in the Racine Interfaith Coalition, which receives Catholic Campaign for Human Development funding. So I work with them. This is my third adult job. My first adult job was I practiced law in Milwaukee for many years, and then decided to go back to school to do graduate work studying international relations, and specifically I looked at the influence of the Vatican in international relations. And I remember one time, once I got this job, and I've had it since 2004, I was flying somewhere and I met somebody in the airport that was a friend of ours, and she said, and I told her what I was doing, and she was like, oh, I didn't realize you had a theology degree. And I said, I don't have a theology degree. And she's like, well, do you have a ministry degree? And I said, no, I don't have a ministry degree. And she's like, well, what do you have? And I said, well, I have a law background and I've got some background in political science. And I describe myself as the least theological and least liturgical person that the Archbishop signs a check for. And so this will not be churchy at all tonight. One of the things that I want to just go through this evening, and both Eloy and Father were very adamant that this was going to be an open-ended discussion, an open-minded discussion, and a free-flowing and honest discussion. And I'm perfectly fine with that. In fact, I think that's very important. I remember being at a meeting one time with former Lieutenant Governor Farrow, talking about we were going into the meeting, and I was mentioning to her that there was going to be some conflict in that meeting, and there were going to be some people there that were disagreeing with what she was saying. And she said something to me that has struck me, is that anytime adult Catholics or adults get together and talk about their faith, it's a good thing. And I really, truly believe that. I also realize that I work in the social justice area of the church, and that it's one of the rare things that in any room, regardless of who's in that room, there's going to be at least 30 to 60% of the people who disagree with something that I say. And I'll explain why that is as we go through that. But I totally understand that. And I think that that's just part of the fact that out into the public square, there are going to be disagreements. There are going to be disagreements on what the role should be and what we should do. But I'll set a few sort of parameters about the talk. One phrase that I hope you remember, and you probably have already heard this, but if you the big word, or some of the big words in Catholic social teaching, is both and. It's both and. That everything is a both and. And part of the reason that we talk about that is that in Catholic teaching, we realize that everything that folks do is a combination of their own decisions and the circumstances that they find themselves in. And let me explain that a little bit. All of us live our lives. All of us are moral agents. We make decisions on how we want to live our lives. But we make those decisions within systems that we find ourselves. And so you can think about this and just kind of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And some of those systems are just somewhat arbitrary. And I mean, this is an example that I used in the deacon class. And I don't know, maybe some of you have had the opportunity to travel to countries where they drive on the left side of the road. And I mean, that's the system that they have there, and they're used to it and all of that. It's very confusing if you're like me. You've grown up in a system where you drive on the right side of the road. In fact, one time we were traveling with my family and we were in Ireland, and they travel on the left side of the road. And we had a stick shift. So I was shifting with my left hand, which added a whole nother range of challenge to this. And we were in some place, and I'm driving with my son. We were going to go to buy some groceries. And it was a hill, and there was a stop sign, and that was enough of a challenge. And I survived that, and I'm kind of tootling along and stuff like this. And it's a lot of the roads in Ireland are very narrow, and so there's a car coming the other way, and I'm coming up, and I'm just excited that I've made it past that stop sign without stalling out, that I'm tootling along, and I'm like, oh, I got to move over. And all of a sudden, my son starts yelling, "The left, Dad, move to the left, move to the left." And so fortunately they realized it was a tourist and they got out of our way, and we got that. My point in bringing that up is that we all live in these different systems. Here in the United States, we live in a two-party political system, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We live in, our economic system is a capitalist one. With a very vibrant private market, and that has some effects on what we do. And there are all sorts of other systems that we participate in, and you realize that as we go through. So everything that happens is a combination of our individual choices and the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And those circumstances are our society. And that's when we talk about social justice, we are talking about justice on a societal level. And a great analogy that I just learned a couple of weeks ago is if you think about this, and at this point I wish I had a chalkboard because then I would draw this, but I don't have a chalkboard. So think about a triangle. Think about a triangle. And at 2 points of that triangle are individuals. And so we have our relationships on an individual level with each other. And we have responsibilities to treat each other with love and respect. But then we also have relationships that are societal relationships. We have responsibilities in our society. We have responsibilities to follow the law. We have responsibilities to pay our taxes. We have responsibilities to commit to the common good. So we have responsibilities going up to that societal level. Well, in the same way, society has responsibilities to the people that are in there. Societies need to be, people need to be treated fair. People need to be treated with justice. People need to be treated equally. And so there are always, and again, in Catholic social teaching, it's a both and situation going on. So you have individuals and you have society. And one of the other ways to think about that is that you think about relationships. And there needs to always be, we need to be in right relationships with each other, but we also, our society needs to be in a right relationship that reflects that, to make sure that people, again, are treated with justice and treated somewhat equally. So, we have that. Another way to think about both and these are sort of two metaphors that I hope be helpful for you. If you think about things that, and I'll raise anybody here who said, have you heard the metaphor of the bodies in the river? So social problems. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. We've got two, and Eloy didn't raise his hand. Obviously he wasn't paying attention either now or in class.
I told you that's why you are here.
There you go. It's a remedial effort here for Eloy. But this is a metaphor you often hear in Catholic circles. And you hear it in other circles as well. It's not like we have a metaphor on, or a copyright on good metaphors. But so you have a village, they live by a river, and one day they wake up and there are bodies coming floating down the river. And these people are wailing, they're drowning and all of that. And so of course, the people, what they do is those of you who've had lifeguard training, you know, reach, throw, row, and go. And so they're trying to pull the bodies out of the river, they're gunning this. Well, as they're doing this, it's just a mass of bodies that are coming down this. They look, and there's somebody from the village that's running upstream. And of course, they're overwhelmed with trying to rescue these people, and they're screaming at this person, and like, where are you going? And this person is like, I'm going upstream to figure out why these bodies are coming down the river. And that's exactly how we need to think about all of our different social problems that we have. We need to meet the immediate needs of people who are drowning in the river. We also need to figure out how did they get in the river in the first place? Why are they coming down this river? In a much more, churchy way to say this is to think about what we like to call as the 2 feet of charity and justice. The 2 feet of charity and justice. Charity on one side is to meet the immediate needs of people, whether they're hungry, or they're homeless, or they're lonely, or they need medical care, whatever that need is. And that's to meet that immediate need. But you also look at why do these people have the needs? What needs to change to help them become independent, productive citizens that as well? So why is it? Why the up the river problems, if you will? Now, the other thing I want to say, and we'll go, the next, after I say this, we're going to talk about Catholic social teaching and the 7 themes. And as much as I appreciate the title, Social Justice Taking a Non-Political Stand, I got some problems with that. And the problem I have with that is that it's important to take political stands. We need to take political stands. There are things that are wrong in our world today and in our society that we need to fix. And the way we fix those things is by being involved in politics. We need to be involved in politics. But I think it's very important that when the church is involved in politics, it's involved in politics in a nonpartisan way. We have a 2-party system in the United States. And we have a 2-party system because of our electoral. We have what's known as a first past the post election. Whoever gets the most votes wins. And those, in countries that have that kind of electoral system, you get 2 parties. And we have 2 major parties in the United States. And so if you as an individual are going to be involved in politics, you're going to have to probably be a member of a political party. And that's fine. That's good. That's important that people are involved, and when we're involved, you're involved with politicians, and that involves campaigns and elections and voting. And those are done in a partisan way. But when the church is involved, it's important that the involvement is nonpartisan. Now, the problem we have in our society today is we go through these 7 themes of Catholic social teaching, you're going to see that we kind of line up with one of the parties on some of the themes, and we line up with the other party on some of the other themes. And so it's a very, very important witness of the church to make sure that we are consistent, that when we are arguing for one thing, we make sure that we are all arguing the entire teaching of Catholic social teaching. Because what happens is the church can be used by political parties to advance political party interests. And I will confess to you that if I am a politician in the United States, I'm running for public office, I'm going to try and use any means, legal means, necessary to be elected. And that includes trying to play up the moral authority that I have where I am consistent with the Catholic Church. I remember talking to a politician one time who were leaving a meeting and were walking out, and this particular politician was a Catholic, and he said, "You know, I really appreciate the meeting, really appreciate all you do, Rob." And I'm saying, "Thank you very much, really appreciate that." And he said, "You know, I'm with the Pope 100%. And I'm like thinking in my head, okay, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I like to think I'm with the Pope 100% as well. And as this gentleman is getting on the elevator, he said, right when the doors were closing, except when he has his facts wrong. And then the door closes. And I thought, oh, okay. I'll be curious to see when the Pope gets his facts from this. But again, it's important that when the church is involved in politics, it's in a nonpartisan way. Now, I want to spend a few moments going through the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. And I hope that you've at least heard some of these at some point in your thing. Dawn, what time is it? What time is it? Just about 7. Okay, great. I'm going to cut it down to 5 themes of Catholic social teaching. Kidding. Hopefully the Archbishop is not watching. The first theme of Catholic social teaching, and the reason that my office is called what it is that one of the most important tenets of the Catholic Church is the importance of the respect for life and of human dignity. Each and every human being is made in the image of God and is entitled to love and respect from the moment of conception until the natural death. That is one of the key tenets of Catholic social teaching, is our focus on the inherent dignity of all human beings. And as we go through themes, we'll talk about, you can see how some of the other themes flow from the foundation of that theme of the inherent dignity of every human being. And one of the things that talk about this is it's important to realize is that because every human being is born in the image of God, is that we are all equal in the eyes of God. And that each and every one of us, regardless of the circumstances that we're in, is equal in the eyes of God and loved in the same way from a loving God. The second theme of Catholic social teaching is the call to family, community, and participation. Catholic teaching is that people are social beings. We exist as individuals, but we live our lives in relationship with others. And we get our fulfillment in those relationships. So we have to live in community. We don't have to live in community. We're called to live in community. We're built that way. We flourish in community. And so that's why it's so important in Catholic social teaching and the emphasis on family life. and that because that's the first community that most people live in, is their families. But you live in other communities as well. Your work community, your public community, your parish, your social clubs, all of these things are very important things. And so that's why it's very important for people to be able to participate. And if somebody is excluded from participation in society, that's a problem. And so that's one of the reasons that the church opposes racism. And it is because we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate with things. The third theme is rights and responsibilities. Flowing from our inherent dignity, every human being has certain rights. The right to life, the right to work, for gainful employment, the right to education, the right to health care, the right to housing, the right to food. All of these rights that human beings have. But every right has a corresponding responsibility. People have responsibilities to use these. If you have the right to employment, well, you also have a responsibility to work hard. If you have the right to education, then you have the responsibility to study hard. That's why the deacons work so hard in the class that they studied in. So all of these things is you have a right, but you also have a responsibility. The fourth theme is an option for the poor and vulnerable, often called the preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable. And the reason for this is that, first off, Jesus had a special love for the poor and the oppressed and the excluded. Flowing from that, the church teaches, I've always trying to have, when it's at its best, has a special care for the poor and the oppressed and the excluded. And that's always a challenge for all of us, because as human beings, it's very easy for us to, especially if we're not poor, to forget about those who don't have as much. And frankly, to kind of avoid those kind of problems of that. My son first just graduated from college. A round of applause for my son for graduating from college. Thank you. We dragged him across the finish line, as a friend of mine likes to say. He happens to be working for Catholic Charities in Spokane, Washington. Yesterday, as he was walking from building A to building B, he walks by a group of Catholic Charities has a bunch of buildings in downtown Spokane. And the reason they have a bunch of buildings in downtown Spokane is they have a lot of their housing in downtown Spokane because there's a problem with homelessness in Spokane. And so they have their daytime shelter there, and they built their other buildings around it. So as Matthew is walking between these two buildings, there's a group that's there, and unfortunately somebody pulled out a gun and shot it off into the air right as Matthew is walking by. And this was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and fortunately nobody was hurt. And I don't know what the story is, but the person did not shot the gun up in the air, more probably for a cry for help than trying to physically threaten anybody. But of course, anytime there's a gun involved, it's a very dangerous situation. And as a parent, my natural reaction is, why is my son working in an area where there's going to be gunfire? But of course, I realize there's lots of parents whose children work in the areas where there is gunfire. There's obviously, we can think about the military, we can think about the police, but there's lots of areas in our country where there is a lot of gunfire. And I remember talking with Bishop Hine, who was a priest in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee before he was bishop down in Gary. And I remember talking to him, and he talked about he lived at the cathedral in Gary in the rectory, and he said it was a little disconcerting, all the gunfire that went on. And I thought, what a great witness of the church, that the cathedral is in an area and the bishop is living in an area where he's hearing gunfire all the time. He's really living out that option for the poor and the vulnerable. All that. The fifth theme of Catholic social teaching is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Catholic social teaching, they talk about the response. You have the right to employment, but you have the responsibility of work, and there is a certain dignity in that work. And that creativity that we bring to our work needs to be respected. You need to have the opportunity to work. And then also, and something that obviously has been very important here in the history of the scene, is the importance of labor unions in terms of that. Catholic social teaching, especially, actually, frankly, part because of the influence of the United States in Catholic social teaching, is always been very supportive of labor unions and the right to organize. And that's something that, and we, for lots of different reasons, we haven't emphasized that a lot recently, but it's a very important thing. Business is, and the right to private property is an important part of Catholic social teaching. And it's important that even though people have the right to private property, they don't have an absolute right to private property. They have a responsibility to use their property. We all have a responsibility to use our property in the service of the common good. And that's sometimes challenging for us here in the United States, because in the United States, we live in a culture where private property and your ultimate free use, whatever you want to do with your private property, is an important part of American culture. So that's one of the areas of tension. And I'll share a quick side story on that. During the debate about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the Catholic bishops were supportive of parts of it, were not supportive of other parts of it. And I'll be honest with you, even though I was at the diocese at that time, I didn't follow the debate very much, because at that time I pretty much knew where every member of Congress from the state of Wisconsin and every senator was going to vote on that issue. I mean, we really couldn't move them one way or another. The important votes were in other states. And I was at an event that put on by the AFL-CIO, and a reporter was there, and she asked, I didn't know she was a reporter, we started talking, and then she said, oh, by the way, I'm Alicia Johnson, I think, for the Journal Sentinel, and I just want to ask you a few questions. You're like, you know, are you going to be supportive of work of labor unions? And I said, yes, Catholic social teaching is very supportive of labor unions, so we're looking forward to a good partnership in this effort. And she started talking to me questions about the Affordable Care Act. And I was trying to remember what the talking points were from the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, on that, because I hadn't paid that much attention. When the paper came out the next day, it was a Saturday, I looked through the article, and then I compared to what she quoted me on with what was on the USCCB website. I was right on. I hit it. I hit all 3 points. Boom, boom, boom. It was just phenomenal. I get into work on Monday. There's a 25-minute phone message from somebody complaining to me about, how dare I say that Catholics are supportive of labor unions. This particular gentleman had been a Catholic all his life. He had that. He thought labor unions were terrible things, and he'd had some awful experiences with them. And that is why I go into every room realizing that 50% of the people are going to disagree with at least one thing that I say. Because the thing I knew I was solid on was the thing that somebody complained to me about on Monday. But the thing I was worried about, no one ever said anything to me about that. But six. We're theme number 6. Sorry about that. Am I all right? No, what? Human dignity, call to family, community participation, rights and responsibilities, option for the poor and vulnerable, dignity of work, rights of workers. Now 6. I'm going to 6. Okay, sorry, my bad. Solidarity. Solidarity. The idea that each of us we are sisters and brothers to everybody here, our neighbor across the street, our neighbor even in Illinois, our neighbor in Washington, D.C., our neighbors in Spokane, our neighbors across the globe. We are one human family, and we need to care about everybody because we are in solidarity with them. Of you who were the Polish labor unions that helped bring down communism, the reason they called those labor unions solidarity is because of Catholic social teaching. Poland is a very strongly Catholic country, and the labor unions there knew that they needed to do. They talked about being in solidarity with people. People would understand that would. And then the last thing, the seventh theme, is the care for creation. It's very important that we recognize our planet, our environment, as a gift from God that we use during our lifetime, and we need to hand it off to the other generations in a way that will allow them to have the same, appreciate the beauty and to use it in the same way that we did. So it's very important that we have care for creation. So we have these 7 themes, and they guide us as we live out our lives in public, in our work lives, in our lives in the community, and in our political lives. And so there are things that we take as Catholics into the public square. And we have this teaching, and it's very important that we have this teaching because it keeps us focused on the important things that are in our lives. So, both and the themes of Catholic social teaching. And the last thing that I'll leave with before we move into questions is that, and the discussion, is that, again, it's important to do both things. And one of the things I do is, as you know, Racine, like many parts of our country, there's some great things about it, and there are things that we want to improve about Racine. And it's important that you and the Catholic Church in general is involved in helping to make Racine a better place for the people who live here, the people who work here. And I got to give a plug to a couple of different places that here in the Racine that really do some really good work. And the first thing is St. Vincent de Paul Society. You have a very active St. Vincent de Paul Society here in the Racine area, and they do some wonderful work. And I know they are looking for new members. So if you are inspired by this talk to get involved with the society, see Don Miller over here, and he'll have to pay me $100 for each new volunteer that signs up. And so please sign up. The 23rd that does a great outreach here and serves as a great educational resource for the young people here seen. You also have Hope's Center that works there, and a couple of the other ministries of the Racine Dominicans, like the Bethany Apartments. And Halo does some great work. I would also encourage you, there are several deacons here and several people here that are involved in prison ministry that go to the Racine Correctional Institute and the county jail. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, we can make those connections with you. There are lots of other opportunities to do that. So I hope now we're going to have some open questions and then some discussion. But I hope that the one thing that or a couple of things that you take from this talk is both and. So when you think about things, think about them in terms of both and. So there are no online questions. All right.
Online questions, so I hope you have questions here. So to our people online, thank you for connecting with us, and thank Rob for being here with us. So have a good evening.